This is a recording of Financial Myth-Busting with Don Bennett for Sunday, June 15th, 2014. You can listen to this program live every Sunday morning from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. right here on 105.9 FM and AM 630 WMAL.
Securities offered through Western International Securities Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. The views expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect the views of this station. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.
You're listening to Financial Myth-Busting with Don Bennett.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break.
And this is Don Bennett with Financial Myth-Busting. Welcome. We're going to be talking about the World Cup and soccer and what it means to world economies and what it doesn't mean to America. And at the bottom of the hour, we're going to have Stan Veuger. Now, Stan is the resident scholar at AEI, and he's going to be talking about why soccer isn't a socialist sport, which I think a lot of people think it is. And I'm going to be talking about, is hosting a World Cup worth it, financially to the host country? And in particular, Brazil, because I think they're actually suffering from a lot of the economic ills we're suffering from. And by the way, if you want to become a fan of Financial Myth-Busting, all you need to do is like us on Facebook at Financial Myth-Busting or follow us on Twitter at Don Bennett FNB on Twitter. And if you have any questions about your portfolio, I've been a money manager for 30 years. Give me a call at 1-855-884-DON, and that's 1-855-884-3296. And I don't want to forget to tell all the fathers out there, Happy Father's Day, in particular to my dad. Happy Father's Day, Dad. And I hope you have a great day. So, just to get started, I wanted to just kind of jump into soccer. I mean, certainly some people think it isn't an economic sport, but it is. It does bring in a lot of funds and money to countries around the world, just not necessarily the United States. Did you know that soccer is affectionately known as the beautiful game? And it's actually considered the world's most popular sport and by far the most viewed and followed sport on the planet. Now, its premier events, the World Cup, was watched by almost half the world's population during the 2010 South Africa World Cup. And now the World Cup is also shown in every country and territory on Earth. And this, of course, have led to record-breaking viewership figures. But that isn't a surprise, at least to the fans of the world, because they already knew that this isn't just an ordinary sporting event. This is a very serious sporting event. So, here's my question to you. I don't know soccer. I grew up as a competitive swimmer. I just want to know, what is it about the beautiful game that makes it so beautiful to the world? I want to hear from you. I'm at 1-855-884-DON, and that's 1-855-884-3296. There's an odd exception to the worship of soccer. And like I said, everybody loves it, but it doesn't seem to be that way, this worship in the United States. I want to know why. I mean, if you grew up in the United States, soccer's somewhere near the bottom of events to watch on TV or even in a sports stadium. Why? I want to hear from you. I'm at 1-855-884-DON, and that's 1-855-884-3296. Enlighten me, because as I said before, I like American football, NFL, right? I like competitive swimming, but soccer was never there for me. I don't know why. I mean, maybe I just don't honestly have gotten into it, and I will. But why aren't Americans obsessed with soccer like everybody else? And will soccer ever be big in the United States? Again, give me a call at 1-855-884-DON, and that's 1-855-884-3296. And again, will soccer ever be big in the United States like it is in the rest of the world? I want to hear from you. And while I'm waiting for you to call, I'm going to be talking about the research, actually, I did this week about hosting a World Cup and whether it's worth it to the host country. Economies and business and even major planned sports events don't typically operate on a rational basis. That's the first thing that I started to see in my research. And, of only producing exactly what is necessary to sustain current demand. Instead, in this world that we live in, as demand rises, supply is rapidly increased to the point of excess. And at some point, the excess supply leads to a down cycle, and this is today where the multi-billion-dollar cost of the World Cup Brazil comes into play. The World Cup kicked off in Brazil on June the 12th. as the World Cup's first full day of competition. And that meant, of course, welcoming the last World Cup finalists, and not to mention tens of thousands of fans in the stands and millions more tuning in worldwide on TV. Even the Brazilian stock market was excited and finished the week up 3.81%. Not bad, right? Plus, they estimate that the World Cup Brazil will generate close to $4 billion in total revenue for FIFA. This is FIFA, the International Association of Federation Football, which is the sport's international governing body, of which, by the way, the vast majority of the $4 billion in revenue, they told us, or in the research I found, came from actually television and marketing rights. You know, the World Cup generates more revenue for its association, FIFA, than any other sports tournament except, of course, the NFL Super Bowl, which reigns supreme. Still, the business of the World Cup is not cheap for the host country to operate, and odds are the financial benefits, according to my research, won't last long. And as it stands now, the Brazilian economy is also already facing economic trouble after the World Cup. You know, some countries and cities have managed to profit from well-run major sports events. Some of them have, such as the World Cup and the Olympics, but that's far from the norm, as typically the economic benefits are zero for the host country. And one of the pieces of research that I pulled from was from a gentleman by the name of Victor Matheson, and he's a professor of economics at Holy Cross College. And he really went into this, and basically he said the only host countries that make money already have the facilities built. So that seems to be one of the key components. You see, on paper, FIFA, by the way, doesn't really care if the cost of putting on the cup is $3 billion or $14 billion for the Brazilian economy, because they never pay any of the costs. What a sweet position they're in. And I also think it's odd. Yet they are estimated to walk out with about net-free $2 billion in profit. And again, this game is every 4 years. I mean, right now, Brazilian facilities for the games are rumored not even be completed yet. And even the $318 million stadium that was built specifically for the Brazilian World Cup finals is also rumored to not even be completed. And they are already 3 days into the event. And here's an even odder story, is the place they built it. They built it in a city called Amazonian, which is about 4,000 kilometers from Rio, from the city of Rio. And it can't even be reached by road. So the stadium is already being described as a white elephant. You know, the negative economic after effects are already present. So now you have to ask yourself, what will the tournament's impact be on Brazil's economy and stock market? And if we take our cues from what the past host countries have shown us, the answer appears to be profoundly negative. You know, the World Cup Brazil is in June and in July, and then the Brazilian presidential election in October. So many Brazilians aren't even thinking beyond 2014. So I believe the next year in 2015 will likely be a memorable one for all the wrong reasons. And all because Brazil has a number of growing financial imbalances, just like we do in America. You know, Brazil has dwindling growth. We've got that. High levels of unemployment. That's America. Above target inflation. We've got that. And tons of red tape. Yeah, we've got that with our big government, all of which are worsening Brazil's economy and economic performance and ours. And what's really making things worse is that Brazil's inflation is getting bad. You know, for the month of May, it rose at a higher than expected rate of 0.46%, which makes Brazil's price index at 6.37% in measuring inflation. That's high. In fact, economists have recently lowered Brazil's growth forecast for 2014, as the country is now expected to grow at a rate of only 1.62%. Now, doesn't that all sound familiar? The United States is growing at a rate of negative 1.0% GDP. So I honestly believe they are facing our same serious economic issues because they have modeled their economy too close to ours. And so they're beginning to suffer the same economic ills as us, which also means their financial markets will make a mockery out of sanity and logic, just like ours. It'll happen. You know, there's this place where the difference between what should happen and what is happening is perhaps the greatest it has ever been in our investment lifetime here in the United States. And since we have a more mature economy than Brazil, it's going to happen. You know, for most of my listeners out there that tune in every Sunday or even listen to the archives on the show on the Financial Myth-Busting website, I probably don't even need to rehash all the reasons you already know. But suffice it to say, there's an overwhelming plethora of reasons proving we are just like Brazil. We're heading into an overwhelming amount of issues beyond just the simple reversion to the mean laws of math. We've got weak economic growth. So does Brazil. You know, we've got sky-high valuations. So does Brazil. We've got goosed stock earnings. Yep. So does Brazil. Record high Margin debt? Yeah, Brazil's got that too. Consumer confidence is poor? Yep, we've got that too. Lack of retail buying? Yep, they've got that too. High energy prices, continued central bank suppression of interest rates, and anything that goes against the dollar. And yes, Brazil's got all of that, except for it's against the real. They're all trying to prop their currency up to make them look better. So these are the type of truths that justify a stock market hitting new highs week after week for the past 3 years with barely a pullback of material proportion here in the United States. That's right. What do you do about that? At the end of the day, there's a quote that I love. Louis Pasteur actually said it. He said, "Fortune favors the prepared mind." And what he meant is having a prepared mind when others are losing theirs greatly increases your odds for success. Corrections are typically very vicious and always occur much faster than run-ups. So be prepared with a smart plan. And I'm talking about a pre-correction plan and an intra-correction plan and a post-correction plan. All I'm saying is with the current massive discrepancy between asset prices and fundamentals here in the United States, just like it is in the Brazilian markets, don't be caught as vulnerable as you were in the correction of 2008. So, that being said, I'm back to my original question. We talked a little bit about the economics of hosting a World Cup, but I want to know, will soccer ever be big in the United States? It's just odd. The rest of the world loves it. They're passionate about it. They're obsessed with it, but we're not. Call me at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's DAWN, and that's 1-855-884-3296, and we'll take Dawn in Alexandria. Hi, Dawn. How are you?
Hi, Dawn. How are you?
Good. So what are you thinking? Will soccer ever be big in the United States?
I don't think so, Dawn. It could be big. It could become bigger than it is now. However, because I used to live in the Middle East, and I'm originally from China, and so I've been around and also lived in Europe. And the reason why soccer is so popular outside the United States is because of its simplicity.
Yes.
In terms of, how a kid on the street can join the game. They don't have to buy even shoes. In
right.
fact, and when I lived in the Sudan, they play basically barefooted. They only have to own the ball.
You're absolutely right about that. That is something that actually impressed me about soccer. It seems more of a way of life around the world, and it doesn't seem to care about class or socioeconomic status or race, religion, sexual orientation, or gender. You're absolutely
Nothing.
right.
That's right. And so it's really at the very basic level for entry into the game and maintaining the interest in the game. Very simple. And also in other countries they don't have competitive sports like we have. We have baseball, basketball, and football.
Right.
As long as you have those three sports in the United States, soccer always going to have to in a sharing mode. You know what I mean?
And it actually takes up almost the entire year. You've got football, baseball, and basketball. That's almost consumes the entire year. And unfortunately, here in the United States, they usually attract the best athletes.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so, nobody's actually even giving them a chance. Dawn, I want to thank you so much for giving us a call. And, we're going to be heading into break. And as we do head into break, I want to say this. I think soccer is an extremely popular sport in most of the world, and it doesn't seem to have taken off here in the U.S. It seems that American fans get briefly excited if the national team does well in the World Cup or the Olympics. I've seen this, but then the excitement quickly fades, and then soccer again loses its attraction. So I'm going to ask the question again. Why are there fanatical soccer fans all over the world, but here in the States, soccer isn't a sport embraced by the typical American sports fan? I want to hear from you. I'm at 855-884-DAWN, and that's 855-884-3296. And as we go into break, I hope you give me a call because, I don't know enough about soccer just from what I kind of studied this past week. I get the economics. I get why it doesn't work, but I still don't get why we don't enjoy a very simple sport like soccer. This is Dawn Bennett with Financial Myth-Busting until we get back.
This is Financial Myth-Busting with Dawn Bennett.
So soccer isn't a sport embraced by the typical American sports fan, and I want to know why. Maybe it's because we don't have a huge American idol. When I think of soccer icons, I think of Pele. That's who it was when I was growing up, or David Beckham, and they come to mind, but they aren't Americans. Do you know the name of an American icon soccer player? Call me. I'm at 1-855-884-DAWN, and that's 1-855-884-3296. And I'm going to take Dominic in Arlington. Hi, Dominic. How are you?
I am fine, thank you.
So what are you thinking? Is there a reason soccer isn't big or important in the United States? Is it the fame factor?
Yes. Well, I would say the main reason is that the communities in Europe and the governments in Europe are directly involved, and they support it with money, jobs, economic benefits.
So are you saying that soccer is a socialist sport?
Yes, it's in fact it's a kind of warfare. Europe traditionally has been at war, one country to another, and now they're just continuing this with soccer. So the flags are flying, all the coaches are hired at great expense, players are bought. It's a kind of it's competition, but it's a very serious competition between cities and towns and counties and governments.
So here we are, 2014. The last World Cup was 2010, 4 years after. And are we going to watch soccer in America now because we like it or just pretend to like it?
I don't think we have the structure yet for the whole game to continue to increase the way it has in Europe.
Yeah.
In other words, we don't have the government support. Did the president ever go to a soccer game?
I have no idea. I mean, maybe his daughters played
goes
soccer.
To basketball
but
games.
it does seem like we play soccer as kids, right? But then it just fades away.
And then after that, in high school, it breaks down. Nobody plays at high school, and in college, it's not important.
But I wonder if it's because the Americans actually dream of more being of a LeBron James or a Peyton Manning or any other famous and wealthy professional athlete. I mean, maybe their dreams aren't realistic, but they can't help from imagining themselves in those guys' shoes. So I think that's the reason why. I don't know if it's, how many sports do we have? I mean, NFL isn't necessarily government sponsored, and it seems to do well.
Right. Well, for Europe, it's a question of honor. If Italy loses against England, or it becomes a big crisis in Italy, and the same thing takes place. Yeah.
No, keep going. No, I think that's an excellent point.
Excuse me?
I said that's a good point. Keep going on that.
Well, what happens is counties and states compete with each other. And if one loses, the city fathers are blamed, and it becomes a question of honor, and flags are flying, and the news media play it up, and so on. So it's a very personal thing with them. And in America, who are we going to fight, Mexico or Canada? So if we lose to Canada or Mexico, nobody gets upset.
Dominic, thanks so much. You have made some great points. Here are some of the American complaints about why we aren't in love with soccer. This is based on my research. Lack of scoring, strange rules, not invented in the U.S., yes, kind of difficult to follow on TV and maybe a little bit boring. And here's something else. I was reading something. We don't understand a sport where we don't use our hands. That's kind of interesting, right? So it's odd, the excitement that the World Cup is here, and it's probably going to generate robust TV ratings. But when it's over, Americans will go back to treating soccer with indifference until, of course, the 2018 World Cup in Russia. So I ask the question again, why don't we have enough spirit when it comes to soccer? Because the rest of the world just loves it, and it is a simple sport that doesn't differentiate, with gender and socioeconomic issues. It's anybody can play. Maybe it's just because we're obsessed with our American pastime of American football, baseball, and basketball. I don't know. But I do find it a very interesting question why we aren't focused on it. And maybe part of it is that it's not a sport from the United States, that it didn't have its genesis here in the United States, and that could be the reason. Any way you look at it, we're going to have a great guest coming in and talking a little bit more about this. He's an economist that absolutely specializes in soccer, and it's Stan Veuger, and he's going to be talking about why soccer is not a socialist sport, like our last call-in stated it was. And I happen to agree with Stan. This is Dawn Bennett, Financial Mythbusting, and stay tuned.
This is Financial Mythbusting with Dawn Bennett.
Veuger is here. Stan is a resident scholar at AEI, the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy. This is a group dedicated to research and education on issues of government, politics, economics, and social welfare. Stan's academic research focuses on the political economy and has been published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, The Hill, The National Interest, and U.S. News and World Report. Stan recently wrote a piece that engaged my mind because we are happening to be in the obsessed soccer time period, and the title of which was Soccer is Obviously Not a Socialist Sport because, as Stan wrote, quote, unlike the major American professional sports, failure is not rewarded and incentivized in soccer. There's barely any revenue sharing between teams. Teams invest in young players often as early as age 10. There are no salary caps for players. You don't get to draft better players if you perform poorly. And you can definitely go out of business, unquote. And this is where I want to start today. Stan, welcome to Financial Myth-Busting.
Hi, Don. How you doing?
So tell me something. There are some people out there, like your AEI colleague, Mark Thiessen, who was a speechwriter in the Bush White House, who thinks soccer is actually a socialist sport. We even had a caller that called in that thinks that soccer is a socialist sport. Can you unwind that argument for our listeners and then explain why you honestly think it's not true?
So the sense I get is that the two main reasons why some people believe that soccer is a socialist sport is, one, the countries that typically dominate the sport are European and Latin American. The second one, and this is something my colleague Mark Thiessen talks about a lot, is that soccer players are not generally allowed to use their hands.
Right.
I think that's the central part of it.
But it's also kind of an un-American thing, too, to us.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's very different from baseball, from basketball, from football. Now, look, all sports have their rules, and like some other sports, soccer is a great example of ordered liberty. A goalkeeper can use his hands. Other players cannot. But look, in football, you can use your hands, but then you're allowed to throw the ball forward once. And after that, a regulator steps in and says, look, you've got to stop doing that.
Now, you're talking about soccer football, not NFL football, right?
So right now we're talking about NFL football.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll refer to soccer football as soccer.
Okay, good.
Just to keep things clear. But I think what's much more important is that soccer as a sport, the way it's played on a day-to-day basis, shows many more signs of competition and rewards for excellence than NFL football does. What you see, for example, is that if you're a club team in a sports league, you perform poorly for a year, you don't get better draft picks. Right. You certainly don't get supplementary payments. You get relegated to a different division, and you're basically out of business. If you're trying to hire new players, what do? You try and scout out the best, like 14-year-olds or 18-year-olds, or you pay a massive fee to a different club team to hire that player. In the NFL, of course, what you do is you go to a centralized draft where a bunch of young players are available who were mostly trained by the state at public universities. To me, that sounds much more socialist than anything that happens in soccer.
So in your argument against soccer being socialistic, you actually argue if any sport was, it's actually football, U.S. football. Can you actually take me through that logic?
Well, so there's a variety of reasons why I think that's true. So football, of course, has a lot of revenue sharing within the NFL. You get better draft picks if you perform poorly, so you're basically bailed out for poor performance.
Oh, that's interesting.
As George Will once wrote, the NFL is basically violence interrupted by committee meetings. Much like the Soviet Union. I think it's quite clear that if there's one sport that demonstrates the benefits and some of the disadvantages of capitalism, it's soccer.
So as AEI's resident soccer expert, what do you think of America's chances in the World Cup?
I think they're very poor. So Goldman Sachs put out a long analysis of this particular World Cup a couple of weeks ago, and what they try to do is they try to estimate the probabilities that different teams would win. For the United States, they put their chances at 0.5%. That's a very small number, but I think that's entirely realistic. The U.S. team just doesn't have the... And
then they actually ranked Brazil number one, correct?
Excuse me?
Did they rank Brazil number one? I think I read the study.
They ranked Brazil number one, exactly, at almost 50%.
So
they're playing at home. They're traditionally the strongest team. I think maybe a bit on the high side, but I think that's a reasonable estimate.
So there's always a financial side to sports. And so I'm just wondering, do you believe the Brazilian economy will actually get a boost from the World Cup?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, in the end, a lot of they'll have more tourism these few months than they otherwise would have. I'm not sure if the sort of massive investment in stadiums, especially when they're in places like Manaus in the middle of the jungle,
right.
are particularly productive.
Right.
So I think it'd probably be a tiny positive, but I don't think it'll mean much.
You're thinking it's just going to be short-term, not long-term?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm wondering if there's an impact on a country's chances of World Cup success from the number of overseas players in its domestic leagues.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. So I think the best leagues in the world are the Spanish one, the British one, the German one. And I think the players who are not playing in those leagues just don't get the kind of experience, the kind of training that you need to compete internationally at the highest level. So I do think that it's a disadvantage for the U.S. that quite a few of its players play in the Major League Soccer, which is just not at the same level as those other leagues. So I do think that's absolutely true, and it's a good example again of how globalization in soccer has driven the kind of things that you see in other sectors of the economy, where it's the highest performers who compete directly and who benefit from interacting with each other to make sure that everyone ends up excelling and that the weaker players get rooted out.
Do you think there's an investing or economic lesson to be learned from that?
I think one lesson, and that's probably one that many people know, is that there's no reason to restrict your investment to purely domestic activities, and that there's gains to be made from diversifying your portfolio, both internationally and in terms of industries.
So what about hosting the games? I mean, do the massive investments in these countries make for the honor of holding the cup actually pay dividends to these countries? I mean, maybe short term we talked about. Do you think there's any long-term benefit? I mean, FIFA seems to...
It's hard to assess these things, but I would imagine that if there's a long-term impact, it's through a much more qualitative path, where Brazil may harness its nationalistic pride, and that may help the political process a little bit. I think it would have to be something like that. But again, I think those real economic effects are small. And if anything, until now in Brazil, I think the discontent over the way in which the massive public expenditure programs, investment programs, have worked out probably swamps those positive effects.
So let's talk about future World Cups. FIFA has been excoriated for giving the 2022 World Cup to Qatar. There's these ongoing allegations of corruption and bribery and the awarding of the game to them. And it's kind of odd. I mean, this is a desert nation, so this sun-parched patch of the Middle Eastern sand where they're going to be playing, it could be 104 degrees. I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense. So I'm wondering what you think of that.
I think you're entirely right that it makes very little sense. Typically, a World Cup is played during the summer. The original plan FIFA came up with after they realized this was all a bit ridiculous was to move it to the winter, which would disrupt a lot of domestic league play. I think in the latest developments, there are signs that they may be willing to accept, okay, it's now become clear to everyone that this was all the result of corruption and bribery, and we're going to reconsider and maybe go through the allocation procedure again. And I think that would be an entirely reasonable thing to do. So
is this a solution to put the 2022 games in the United States? I think that we finished second, right, when they were counting the votes?
Yeah, I think that's right. So the U.S. or England, a country like that, a country that has the kind of infrastructure, a country where you won't see hundreds and hundreds of workers die in terrible labor circumstances as they construct the stadiums. I think that would be much better, and the U.S. did a great job in '94. I think would be able to do a great job again. Do you think this issue with Qatar is actually going to force FIFA to focus on, to always put these World Cups in a place where human rights are actually important? Even in Qatar, I mean, I guess there's very little human rights for women. There's very little human rights for gays. Everything seems to be very severely restricted. Do you think that FIFA learned their lesson? There's certainly also very, very limited rights and protection for immigrant workers, which do most of the actual construction work. I do think it has placed it a bit more on FIFA's radar, but much more so. I think that what they've come to realize is that a small country without any kind of soccer tradition, it's probably the worst kind of choice to begin with. If you couple it with human rights concerns, that may be too much.
So Russia in 2018 is supposed to get the World Cup, and they're very anti-gay. Do they? I mean, again, I'm a competitive swimmer. That's what I did when I was a kid. Do they have a big soccer culture there?
Yeah, they certainly do. So Russia, and before that, the Soviet Union, have always been a reasonably competitive nation. The Soviet Union has won the European Championship in the past. Some of Russia's club teams have, historically performed reasonably well at a continental level. So I think the concerns there would be very different. It would have much more to do with the nature of Russia's current regime than it would be with all of the other things that people worry about in Qatar.
So I wonder. I mean, I'm going to change subjects to the World Cup trophy. I understand there's about 11 pounds of gold in the World Cup trophy. Gold's becoming very valuable in this world. Do you expect it actually to be worth more or less? And I'm actually talking to the economist in you when the 2018 World Cup games come along for Russia.
I have no real idea. The price. I'm not an expert on the price of gold. I don't see inflation escalating in the West over the next couple of years. If anything, you've seen Europe tending toward deflationary pressure. So I think if I had to bet, I would say it would probably be slightly less valuable.
I think I'll probably have to disagree with you because I think there's a lot of demand out there, and since our fiat currency is becoming less and less valuable because of the printing of money and mismanagement of our economy, I think gold's going to be very valuable. So let me ask you, who's going to win the World Cup 2014, and which country is the dark horse? I know you told me what Goldman Sachs said, but I want to hear from you.
Well, in my bracket, Argentina wins. In my heart, I want Holland to win.
Really?
I was born in the Netherlands. It's where I grew up. That's been my root for. And the moment they get eliminated, I stop watching.
But they had a great game against Spain, right?
5-1, exactly, against the reigning world champion. I was very excited.
I guess because Spain's actually really, really good. Why do you think that Spain lost and the Netherlands won?
Well, I think the Spanish team has grown a bit older over time. I think they're now beyond the point where their key players are in their prime. I think Holland did a great job tactically. We basically have three really good players. They're all playing forward positions. I think just making sure you defend with the rest of the team and just hope that those three guys will score a couple of goals. It was a great strategic concept, and I think it worked out real well.
Stan, let me ask you something. I asked this to our listeners today. Why do you think that soccer isn't as obsessed about here in the United States as it is with the rest of the world?
Well, so I think it's a combination of factors. The U.S. has other sports that have traditionally been more popular. That's true for other countries too, right? I mean, the U.S. is one example, but it's true for Canada, it's true for Australia, it's true for India, it's true for Pakistan. It's even true for China still to some extent. There's traditional sports that people care about, and it's hard to get into a different sport once you're an adult. Right? If you don't grow up with these things when you're 8 years old, you're 12 years old, I don't think making the switch is so easy. So I think if it's going to happen, it'll just take some time.
Well, I mean, I think China, for example, is really becoming obsessed and crazy about soccer, aren't they? I mean, I'm understanding that is the fastest growing sport in Asia.
Exactly. It's still growing, and these things take time. China itself is still incapable of fielding even a reasonably good sport, even though they are, of course, very competitive in disciplines like swimming. So I think what you're saying is certainly correct, but it'll just take some time for the full-fledged soccer culture to come into being.
Stan, I want to thank you so much for being on Financial Myth-Busting. This is Stan Veuger, and you've got to get his piece. It's really interesting. Soccer is obviously not a socialist sport. You can actually go to the AEI website, and that's the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy. And this is Dawn Bennett with Financial Myth-Busting. When we get back, we're going to be talking about, I'm going to call it a weapon, that China and Russia has developed against the West. This is Dawn Bennett, and we'll be right back.
This is Financial Myth-Busting with Dawn Bennett.
love Brazilian music. That's beautiful. Listen, I've always said this. No matter how much you think your life will remain the same, you're almost certainly wrong, and the same goes with capital markets. So here's some change that I think actually is going to be very dramatic to our markets. And I talked about this powerful weapon that's actually going to stand up to the United States that Russia and China are working on. And no, this isn't a bomb, and this isn't a cyber espionage type of satellite. I mean, these two nations, China and Russia, have actually launched a frontal attack on the U.S. financial markets because they have agreed to set up a joint rating services agency. Now, before, pretty much all that comes out of the United States and maybe a little bit in Europe. But because of Moscow's standoff with the West over Ukraine, it made them very eager to reduce its dependence on U.S. rating services, because once that happened, the U.S. rating services actually downgraded Russia. Now, until now, the two countries have been powerless to stand up to us in this area. I mean, powerless. We have the international reserve currency of choice. We also have global monetary transactions, businesses like Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. And but just know this, pretty much the world financial markets pretty much ticked to Western time. I just don't think that may last anymore. Russia and China plan on changing the status quo by forming their own rating agency. And I'm just wondering if this is going to be another nail in the dollar standard and the U.S. economic dominance coffin. I'm just wondering. So again, it's back to always keep an eye on what's going on. Look at this. You look at the writing on the wall, which is why we always talk about gold and silver on this show. I think it's a currency of choice and importance in the future. And you should be having it in your portfolio as well as owning it individually, maybe at home, or we've got clients that actually put their IRAs in gold and silver. And if you're ever interested in doing that, give us a call. We're at 866-286-2268, and you can actually purchase gold and silver coins or bars through Bennett Group Financial. And we do it for very inexpensively compared to the other people out there that are charging 15-20%, which I think is outrageous. So give us a call if you're interested in that. It's at 866-286-2268. I do think it will help hedge you against what we're going against here in the United States, which is a de-dollarization of the world, because our economy and our politics aren't exactly strong enough, I think, anymore to support being the international reserve currency of choice. And then also I want to remind everybody we have another seminar on July 31st, and it's at the Ritz-Carlton in Tyson's Corner, and it's going to be at 7 p.m. So if you're interested in coming to that, again, give us a call at 866-286-2268. And I, call it a retirement survival seminar because the markets are different, and you need to continually question what you own in your portfolio and why you own it. So we will help you do an analysis on your portfolio for free, and the seminar is for free. And again, if you're interested, it is July 31st at the Ritz-Carlton in Tyson's Corner, and it's at 7 p.m., and you have to RSVP. So give us a call at 866-286-2268, or you can actually email us at info@BennettGroupFinancial.com. And you know what? That's all I've got. This is Dawn Bennett with Financial Mythbusting, where politics and the economy intersect.